video is to talk about the operations of an engine lathe. The main function of a lathe is to hold and rotate a workpiece. Typically you're working with round material. Not always, you could be using any shape, but typically you take round material and put it in a lathe. The lathe can perform turning, facing, grooving, threading. You can even drill in a lathe. The lathe has many moving parts, so it's a very good idea to keep an organized work area. You want the floor to be clean, and you want the machine to stay organized as you run it. As you can see, we have a tool board up there. Try to keep as much stuff on the tool board as you can. Safety is a big thing. The reason why we worry a lot about safety on a lathe is there's these rotating parts. When this lathe runs, this chuck here is attached to the spindle, and that'll rotate. So as that rotates, there's always this hazard of something getting stuck in there. So you want to take extra care with that. When this rotates, you will see that these shafts down here rotate. Now sometimes that's more dangerous yet because you're not always thinking about what's happening down here. So be always mindful to keep your shirt tucked in, keep your hair tied back, keep your sleeves up by your elbows, so nothing can get caught in this rotation. Some of the other hazards are going to be the hot chips that come off the machine. Some of the chips are going to be stringy. So chip control is a big deal. These are the kind of chips you don't want. These really long stringy chips. They're very razor sharp, and these can get wound up in the machine as well. So anytime you can avoid a chip like that. Now I have them in a box, so I'm not touching those. If you end up with chips like this, absolutely you must wear gloves to remove these chips. Use a chip hook or pliers as well. Do not use your bare hands. The kind of chips you're looking for are going to be short, broken chips. Now these also don't touch with your hands, they're very sharp, but they should be in the shape of 6s or 9s. That's what they say in the machinery's handbook even. They recommend keeping short, broken chips. Those are safe chips. These chips came from a carbide tool, that's why they're discolored. On the tools that we're going to use here for the first part of our projects is a hand ground tool. You may not have chips this nice, but you definitely don't want the long stringy chips. One thing we're going to talk about here today is all the machine controls. Now I know the machines are different. Even in this shop we have probably 6 different brands of lathe. This is a sharp lathe, so let's just look at the controls on the sharp lathe. Let's just start here on the headstock. The main part of the lathe that houses all the gears, underneath there's going to be an electric motor that rotates the spindle, and it's all gears inside of here. So for the RPMs, or how fast the spindle rotates, that will be taken care of with these 3 top levers. This first one is a high and low lever. The middle one, you can select which speed you are in once you choose the high or low. And the third lever shows X and Y. And if you look at this chart, there are X's and Y's here as well. So just for an example here, let's say I want to go 75 RPM. So to go 75 RPM, that would be low. So I need to push this lever over to low. That would also be, if you follow that blue line all the way over, it's the letter X. So this handle needs to be an X. It can be either X or Y. So we're going to put it in X. And then 75 would be in this row. So this handle has 3 positions. You could have it in this row, that row, or this row. So when this is lined up in that row, you're in one of these 4 speeds. If you're in low, you're going to be either 75 or 20. If you want to be in 75, you have to go over to X. So that this handle would be in X. So these 3 handles control the spindle speed. The other part of the lathe you have to worry about is the inches per revolution, or the feed rate on the lathe. So with the lathe, the feed rate means inches per revolution. So every time the chuck rotates, the carriage will advance. On this machine, there is a chart that shows you your different feed rates. The top chart shows you the threads per inch. The second chart is metric threads. And the 2 bottom charts are the ones for the feed rates. So for right now, you can forget about the top chart and that middle chart. We're just going to look at these 2 bottom charts. So on this chart, it shows feed rate. That's the zigzag line. That means feed rate, and they're showing the arrows going horizontal. So that would be your Z-axis or your carriage movements. The other chart shows a zigzag lying vertically. That would be your x-axis or your cross-slide feed rate. So for this example today, let's try to set the machine up for 5 thousandths per revolution. So it's 0.005. So to set the handles on the machine, we'd have to go CT ME2. So this is C, it's already in gear. T, M, this one you can choose either M or P, we need it to be an M. If the gears don't line up, just switch it back to neutral. You have to rotate it by hand. M, E, 2. So right now the machine would be set up for 75 RPM and a feed rate of 5 thousandths per revolution. Now this will vary on every machine you run. This is just an example on this machine. Let's talk about the carriage controls. On the carriage, there's all these other levers and handles. On the very top of the carriage is the tool post. This is what's going to hold your tool. Right underneath the tool post is the compound slide. And that's primarily used for threading or turning tapers. Underneath the compound slide is the X hand wheel. Now X controls the diameter on the lathe. As you move your tool closer or further away from center, that changes the diameter of the part. Right underneath that is the feed engaging handle. Whether you want it to feed on the carriage, neutral, or feed on the X. If we go to the left of that handle, we have this biggest handle on here. That is for feeding the carriage towards and away from the chuck. That's also known as the Z-axis on the lathe. That is also controlled if you're going to use power feed on this machine with this handle here. Right now it's in neutral position. If it's down, it controls this handle. If it's up, it'll control this handle. The other handle on the face of the saddle here is the power feed handle. If I push this down, it engages the feed, so the machine will control how much feed rate these handles have. If you've set that to 5 thousandths, this handle will feed 5 thousandths per revolution. So when it's down, it's in gear. Up means it's not in gear. It'll be in neutral. The other handle over here is used later on for threading, and I'll show you that in the threading demonstration. That's used along with this thread dial. So these you don't have to worry about right now. The other handle we use, it's on the carriage, is the spindle start forward, off, and reverse. So always be mindful of this handle. Sometimes that gets bumped when people are working around the machine. So just to be safe, always make sure that your emergency stop is pushed in. So right now, being that that's pushed in, there's no power to the lathe. I'm going to move the handle and nothing's going to happen. But if you want the spindle to go forward on this machine, you push it towards the operator and up, and that would be spindle forward. That would be spindle off and spindle reverse. On the floor here, if you look, there's a foot brake. Now if the machine was running and I stepped on that brake, that would bring the machine to a stop. All of a sudden. If I just go from forward to neutral or off, it would coast to a stop. If I step on the brake, it stops it faster. So those are the apron controls. The other part of the lathe we need to talk about is the tailstock. The tailstock supports the tail end of your workpiece. So this tailstock can be adjusted anywhere on the ways. And on the back side of the tailstock, there's 2 levers. The large lever clamps the tailstock to the ways. The small lever clamps the quill. So if this is unlocked, you can use the tailstock hand wheel, and that'll extend or retract the quill. So that's the quill lock. So all these parts move on the ways. These ways are the most precise part of this machine. If these ways become damaged, dirty, or worn out, you will lose all accuracy of this machine. So it's very important to keep the ways clean and oiled. Before you come in and run this machine every day, I'd like to see you take a shop towel and just wipe the machine down. Even if nobody ran it, the dust in the air will collect on the ways and make the machine inaccurate. So wipe it clean, both the tailstock ways and the ways that the carriage rides on. After you've wiped them clean, you need to apply more way oil to them. This is a special oil. It's for the ways. It is not the same as the cutting oil. So just apply oil to the machine. That replaces any oil you may have wiped off. There's also an oiler on the machine. Just come in and pump that every class period. When you come in, just pump that. Now that oil comes out of this reservoir for this carriage. So keep in mind where the oil level is. If you look on this machine, there's a sight glass on there that shows you the oil level. Typically, it'll be the technician's job to fill that up, but if you ever notice as the machine operator that this is running low on oil, let your instructor know, and we'll take care of it. The same thing is important by the headstock. Make sure you wipe this down. Now this is before you start working and after you are done. Make sure you wipe it down and re-oil it. So that's oiling the ways. There's an oiler on here. The other sight glass you want to look for is on the headstock. There's another, they call that a sight glass. Just look where the oil level is in there, and if you notice it's low, let somebody know. They will fill it up. And down here is another sight glass. Just keep an eye on that. Chances are you won't see those down in the low level. I see this one is getting close, so I'll let the technician know to fill it up. But the only reason why we keep an eye on that is if something was leaking, it would run out of oil and damage the machine. So let me show you how to start the machine. First, you have to make sure that the emergency stop is out. All you have to do is rotate that and it pops out. The button right underneath it turns the controls on. This would be for the coolant pump. We're going to leave that off because there's no coolant in this machine. Some machines have coolant and some do not. The top button is actually the spindle jog button. Now that's just a momentary button. When I push that in, you will see the spindle move. And as soon as you let go of it, the spindle coasts to a stop. On the carriage is where the spindle forward and reverse was. So when I lift this handle up, you will see the spindle rotates forward. If I put it back in the middle position, it coasts to a stop. If I put the handle down, that puts the spindle in reverse. You can see now the spindle is rotating the other way. So you see how long it takes for it to stop. Let me go forward, and I'll use the brake this time. And this time the chuck will stop right away. So if something bad is about to happen, use the brake. So just keep in mind, always work safely. Maintenance your machine, make sure that everything is nice and clean and oiled before you start and after you are done. If you're running the machine for a long period of time, it's maybe even a good idea to brush the chips down into the chip pan, wipe it off and re-oil it even halfway through your class period. The better you take care of this machine, the better parts it makes for you.